Senator Colbeck, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pavlo, and appreciate the opportunity to discuss this legislation. I think we've all heard the discussions around the fact that a lot of our education service providers would like additional funding available for schools. And so then it gets, from a public policy perspective, it becomes a topic of, all right, let's go off and ascertain that need, and then if there's a valid need associated with that, then we should go off and identify ways to go off and fulfill that need. And what we have before us, before the committee today, is one option on how to go off and fulfill that need and provide additional funding for education in our state. And it's around a program I'm referring to as the Enhanced Michigan Education Savings Program. Now, Michigan already has something called the Michigan Education Savings Program that is focused on higher education. What we're talking about doing here is converting that current MESP and its scope into a much broader scope and treating education as a lifelong endeavor. In other words, it's going beyond just post-secondary education and extending the provisions of the MESP to include K through 12, as well as vocational training or anything else that you want to do down the road. If you want to do a career change, that's an account that you can have an investment in as well. So the intent is to set this up as a tax-advantaged account that can be used to provide supplemental income for education throughout our state. So the basic goals are additional funding for K through 12 education. That was the main driver on this, and we said, well, why stop there? We've got a lot of vocational education opportunities as well. Let's make sure we have the plumbing put in place to support that. Just like the MESP, the current MESP, it provides a means of reducing the cost of higher education as well with tax-deferred contributions. And one of the last things is that, one of the things that was evident, we started off this year talking about ways of improving performance in some of our lowest performing schools. And invariably, the solutions that work best are the ones that are involving parents, teachers, and students. In other words, it was very local on the control. Well, one of the ways of enforcing it, as we know as legislators, if you want to assert control over policy in the state, you use the appropriations process to go off and do that. Well, one of the things we'd like to do with these accounts is put that money and the control over that money and decisions around purchases into the hands with those the end customers and the ones that have the most to gain or lose in regards to education services. So we're putting the control into the hands of parents for the disbursements from these Michigan Education Savings Programs. So, all right, first I want to clarify what this bill is or is not. This is not about dealing with current tax revenue streams from in the state of Michigan, either at the local, state, or federal level. This has nothing to do with public monies in that context. What this is doing, though, is setting up student-specific accounts that open the door to private sources of funding that may or may not have been taken advantage of in the public school sector to this point in time. As a matter of fact, joining me today, we're going to Mike Curry from Detroit Cristo Rey, is that we've got an example where folks that are in parochial school system have been scraping the bottom of the frying pan for scraps in regards to funding for quite a while, and they've got some innovative methods that have worked well for them and have kept their ships have stayed afloat and actually provided good education opportunities for students that choose that option in the state. And what they're here to do today is actually share some of those programs with my colleagues here so that we could take advantage of that philosophy, those innovations, for public school funding. And so if you look at this chart, the private column that's up there, when we're talking about alternative methods of funding that don't involve tax revenue, what we're really talking about primarily are things like work-study programs, which address a very serious need that we have in the state. I got 32,000 job openings in my district alone, and we got the jobs now. What we're missing are the good employees to go off and fill those jobs right now. And this opens the door to these work-study programs where the kids can learn early on what are the skills necessary for a certain job and maybe kind of orient their lives to what they want to do down the road and get some valuable experience to go off and steer them. I know personally when I decided to go into aerospace engineering, we didn't have any aerospace engineers in the family. I didn't have a clue what an aerospace engineer did. But what I did get engaged in, and this was at the collegiate level, is I got involved in a co-op program, which is like this work-study program for high school. And when I got through that program, I understood exactly what kind of courses I need to take going forward. I understood what skills I needed, and I understood what I'd like to do when I finally grew up, so to speak, and it was invaluable. And I'd like to open that opportunity up for students at the K-12 level as well. There's other things that are out there. I highlight other private sources of funding that are monetized, like monetized reward programs, so big box stores like Kroger and Meijer. There are companies that are spinning up right now that will allow you to collect or put together a portfolio of these reward programs and then give you a monetized value for particular rewards on it, and then you can direct those rewards to a specific student, to a specific school, to a specific school district, to a specific state, and they could be apportioned accordingly. But one of the things that makes those so attractive for a lot of people is that if you're in a family and you want to go off and support you know, one of the kids in a family, you can direct all the purchasing decisions, all the reward programs from all the different family members into helping out that particular student. The other thing you can do is foundation grants, and then other mechanisms, just direct family contributions, that kind of stuff. But I want to make it clear, we're talking specifically about going beyond the current funding streams we're talking about for K through 12 and extending them out to how do we make them amenable so that private sources would be interested in providing some direct funding. So we talked about work-study programs, and just to put a dollar figure associated with that, there's a couple schools in Detroit that are doing this currently, Cornerstone and Detroit Cristo Rey, and like I said, Mike Curry is going to be here today to talk about that. But in exchange for about $7,000 a year per student, they'll provide, employers will provide, or employers receive 5 days a month of work from particular students, and the student gets good, valuable experience, the employer gets a good employee, and they'll contribute that $7,000 towards their tuition for that private school. That's a really good program, and you know, $7,000 is a very large chunk of change for a lot of schools. And if you had supplemental funding on that order, a lot of school districts could find some very valuable services or service enhancements to go off and leverage some of those dollars. But the one thing I need to understand, that's important around this and why we create these accounts is that they need to be student specific, because if a kid doesn't show up to work, they don't get paid. If they're not fulfilling their end of the bargain, you can't just do this broadly at a school district level and assume that it's going to be taken care of and the kids are going to go off and respect it and actually take advantage of the program and honor the terms of the program, or the parents will honor the terms. You have to have some skin in the game, and you only get that when you're at that student-specific account level and making it so that the funding is student-specific. The same thing for the monetized reward programs. I mean, sure, there's some global, you know, a lot of people do this in some Kroger reward program, for example. I know where some of those rewards will get targeted to a specific school district, and they can leverage it for extracurricular activities and stuff like that. That's fine, but when you start opening it up so that it's student-specific, now you open the door to families, extended families, and across the board, and it opens it up to even more funding sources. And then, of course, there's always foundation grants that can be dispersed that we were talking about before. But these programs also work best when they're tax advantaged, and that incentivizes people to take advantage of them, and that's what we plan on doing with these bills. All right, so just to put this in context of what the total opportunity is, when I did an analysis on this when we were considering Detroit Public School bailout, I did an analysis of all the different students, the number that they had in high school, the number that they had throughout K through 12, and when you calculate that out, it works out to about an additional $3,000 per pupil per year that could have been put into the Detroit public school system potentially under certain terms, not necessarily these specific bills, but under the idea of leveraging programs like a work-study program or a monetized reward program. And just so you know, the debt servicing for Detroit public schools was about $1,500 per year. So an additional $1,500 per year would have been potentially available for improvements in the school district if this sort of approach would have been approached, or taken. So I want to highlight, these are real dollars. If we were to talk about a $3,000 per pupil foundation allowance increase, I think we'd have a lot of people paying attention to what we're talking about in this. And so I want to make sure everybody understands the opportunity. Now, that's assuming full participation. So And usually what I do is I highlight the full opportunity on it. But if you had half participation and you got to $1,500 per pupil per year, is that something people would take say, oh, that's not enough, we need more? Or if you even had $200, maybe 20% of the people participated, is that enough? 10%? This is just an opportunity to get more people engaged and provide additional funding streams that I think are providing value not just for the student, but also for the employers and also for the parents struggling to find money for college education. So currently in Michigan, we have a couple different education savings programs. We got the MET, which is Michigan Education Trust, and we've got the Michigan Education Savings Program. And as I've talked about before, MESP currently is focused on college. It's not on K-12. Education saving programs in other states, Arizona was the first to set up these. Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, Nevada, North Carolina, they've all done this. The bottom line on this slide is that we're not doing anything radical that hasn't been tried elsewhere. This is an opportunity to go off, and most of these have been done to open up special education services up to these funding streams. In this case, we're not specific as to what the eligible services are. We're letting the Michigan Department of Education define what those are. Federal education savings programs, because we talk about tax advantages associated with these programs. In Michigan, we got an income tax of 4.25%. I mean, it's significant for people that are earning income. That's a 4.25% that's taken out of their paycheck. But when you start looking at the federal government, that's where the lion's share of the paycheck is taken from. I mean, now we're starting to talk on the order of 15, 20, 30% coming out of people's paychecks. So tax deferrals or tax exemptions start having a real impact on folks when you get into the federal tax. We're focused right now, on these bills. Obviously, we can only change state law, so that's what we're focused on. And we'll talk a little bit about the federal stuff in a little bit. But at the federal level, there are something called 529 plans, and these plans are focused on post-secondary education, and they provide certain tax advantages associated with that. And so Michigan, when you see a tax 529 compliant plan like our current MESP is, that's what they're referring to. But there's a broader savings plan called a Coverdale Education Savings Account that extends the higher education savings out to K through 12. And but there's a lot of differences when you go through and dial down the differences on it. But one of the big differences, they've got an income cap on it for Coverdales, and they've also got a tax exemption cap around $2,000. So there's not a significant cap, if you will, when it comes to Coverdale. So they're kind of a smaller package. So what we're trying to propose to build upon everything that we talked about before, the basic bill package before you can be summarized as follows. What we're trying to do is enable student-specific EMESP accounts, which allow parents to pay for educational services as defined by the Department of Ed. The accounts will be hosted by Treasury or a third-party vendor on contract with Treasury, so those accounts can go off and accrue interest over time through investments. They're only available for students enrolled in public schools, for people that are talking about this being for parochial schools or private schools. That's not the scope of this legislation. We have fairly severe restrictions regarding Article 8, Section 2 in the Michigan Constitution around that. We don't want to go bump up against that in what we're talking about in this legislation. This is only focused on public education. And I'd like to also focus that this student participation is optional. Nobody has to participate in it. The school participation in this program is optional. If you want to receive funds dispersed from these education accounts, and then it is something that you can go off and opt into, but there are requirements around the schools if you choose to opt into it. And MDE is going to be responsible for determining which education services are eligible, subject to the constitutional restrictions. If there are interested schools that want to receive disbursements from them, they've got to provide the prices for their education services online so that people can understand how much it costs for them to go off and receive those particular services. And essentially they're going to break it down in an a la carte menu similar to what you would have if you went to a community college or you went to a university, buying courses by the credit hour, for example. And it would see something similar to that. So the infrastructure is already there in many education institutions across the state. Parents would have access online or offline to the account information, and payments from the EMESP accounts to education service providers is controlled by the parents. They're the ones who swipe the debit card that say it's going to this specific service or this specific service, and they can shop around for those particular services. Any money left over when a student graduates can be used for post-secondary education. We already talked about the accounts receiving money from private sources. The contributions, interest on balance, qualified withdrawals are exempt from Michigan income tax. We're working on the federal income tax exemption, and that's in a separate context. We got a resolution that's being drafted to contact the feds on exactly what they could do to help us out. I've already been in discussions with representatives from the Federal Department of Education, and they're on it. They're working to help us out on this and move things forward to go off and enable that federal tax exemption once we get down the road. To support that, though, we're going to put together a resolution just to kind of formalize that letter, and I look forward to bringing that up before the committee as well. That's still in the works right now. So for the purpose of kind of framing the discussion, I want to do a comparison between our current MESP program and the proposed enhanced MESP program. Both are exempt from state contributions and investment earnings. Both of them are not eligible for contributions to be tax exempt from a federal perspective. Where the MESP differs from the EMESP is that when you earn interest on the earnings in those particular accounts, the MESP would allow the earnings to be tax exempt, so your capital gains type of is exempt. But MESP is, both of them, MESP and EMESP are eligible for higher education expenses, but where the real differences come in are around K-12, around vocational ed, skilled trades, and professional development. The E and EMESP is intended, that enhancement is designed to turn this into a lifelong education savings program, and that's the big difference. So how it converts itself into a series of bills is that we've got a total of 6 bills before you, and we're going to have another resolution pending that we're working on right now. And the enhanced one bill is just simply creating these enhanced MESP accounts. The next bill is essentially intended to be a little charter for Michigan Department of Education saying, here are the things we're looking for you to do. The next one is saying, all right, if parents, if you want to participate, here's what we need you to help out with, and here are the expectations for the parents. Another one, the next one is 547 is just an MESP fix, so we already had some provisions in law that were specific to the MESP. We want to make sure that we don't have any ambiguity when we differentiate between an EMESP and an MESP. So we got a little technical fix bill with 547. Then we've got a bill that defines what the expectations are for the schools, and that's in Senate Bill 548. And then we have one that's specifically for Treasury, and that's the Senate bill, that's on income tax exemption, and that's on Senate Bill 549. So thank you for helping me out with my recovery from being a management consultant all those years. I have to speak in PowerPoint. So, but having said that, I think we tried to lay out, you know, where we are currently right now and what we're proposing with this bill package. And I think what you'll see in the final analysis is an opportunity to provide a lot of additional funding for education without increasing the burden on taxpayers in our state.
Well, I appreciate it. You and I have been discussing this concept for a very long time, and it looks like you got it in a pretty good spot. And I would just say that this is probably the most innovative, new additional funding source potentially that's ever come before this committee. While the cry has been out there, more dollars, more dollars, more dollars, I appreciate you using your engineering skills to figure out how to make that work. I know Senator Boer has another committee. Do you have a question before we... Okay. All right. Well, we appreciate that. Senator Hopgood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm leaving pretty soon for another committee as well. I had a quick question. It's interesting, and I haven't probably thought about it as much as you were the chairman, but just trying to learn a little bit. Where is the line between sort of like the regular academic offerings that you'd sort of expect and need to be fulfilled by the local school,
Yeah.
and what would be, maybe eligible for this. Because the concern, or the thing that comes to mind is, does this potentially over time become something where, students and families are being required to cover in a tuition-like manner some of their sort of basic educational programs and services, and that would be a real concern.
Yeah, no, and we went through those scenarios and trying to see how would this incentivize that kind of behavior or not. Couple things on that. Number one, Article 8, Section 2 of the Michigan Constitution guarantees a free public education to everybody. And for core services like reading, writing, arithmetic, all that, Michigan Department of Education has no authority to go off and say, these are eligible services to be funded via private sources. We are obligated as a state and as citizens of the state to go off and provide for a free public education under the terms of our Constitution. So that's and MDE actually activates as a control point, and we legislatively, if we see them coloring outside of the lines on that, it's our obligation to go off and identify that they are indeed coloring outside of the lines, and we can batten down the hatches further on the statute. So as far as services that I would see this supporting right now, there's things that are outside of that core education services. I mean, simple things like band practice or something like that, or maybe getting an instrument. Maybe it's going into identifying you need extra reading tutorials or SAT prep activities or something like that. Those services could ostensibly be paid for out of this particular area. So there's a lot of stuff that you wouldn't consider core education services, and some of the states actually get we've got our Michigan Merit Curriculum. We define what our core requirements are for educating a student. So those requirements are pretty well defined, but pretty much anything outside of that particular box is something that parents still engage in. They still spend money on for their kids, and this opens the door for them to do so out of the funds in a tax-exempt account. So it's seen as supplemental. It doesn't supplant it. It simply supplements it.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. We appreciate it. I'd like to call up Mike Corey, Detroit Cristo Rey. Neutral on the bill, would like to speak, would need 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Corey. I'm the president of Detroit Cristo Rey High School. Cristo Rey is part of a network of 32 high schools around the country in about 19 or 20 different states. Each Cristo Rey school has the same mission, which is to provide a Catholic college prep education to students who normally could not afford to go to a private school. And we're actually very explicit about that. If you make above a certain income, you cannot come to our school. I like to think we're a very exclusive club. So the average income of the families that attend our school is about $34,000. Over 90% of them would qualify for free or reduced lunch under federal poverty guidelines. Because this is the economic situation they're in, they are not in a position to pay significant tuition. And while many of them do pay a tuition, the tuition we receive from our families is less than 5% of the total amount we spend. Because we're in Michigan, we get no funding from the government, unlike some of our other schools in the Cristo Rey network. So we have a pretty significant gap that we need to cover to provide the education we want for our students. Like all the schools in the Cristo Rey network, we have a work model. All of our students work jobs. So today is Tuesday, all of our sophomores are working. Tomorrow's Wednesday, our freshmen are gonna go work. They work real jobs at over 80 corporate partners that we have in Metro Detroit. General Motors, DTE, great partners. They work at law firms, they work at hospitals, they work for automotive suppliers. Just about any industry that you can think of, our students are there working. We have students who work in the birthing center at St. Mary Mercy Hospital, actually in the labor room, in the delivery room, assisting the medical teams. So the reason we do this is for two reasons. The first reason we do this is to help fund our school. This year, our students will earn about $2.25 million toward the cost of their education. We're going to spend a little bit over 4, so over half of the money comes from our students working. The second reason we do this, and it is impossible to overestimate, is the impact it has on our students. If you come from a family with an average income of $34,000, you're probably not having dinner with an engineer or a human resources vice president or an attorney, but this is who our kids work with. And so through these exposures at their jobs, they begin to see the value of a college education. So we've had 6 graduating classes. Every one of our students has been accepted to college. We track our students in college through the National Student Clearinghouse. And our first graduates from class of 2012, 2013 are on track to graduate at about 4 times the national average for low-income high school graduates. Our goal is 6 times, so we're not there yet, but that's what we're doing. Our experience with the work program is it's transformational for our students, and it's also transformational for our work partners, many of whom have told me this is one of the best things they've ever done for employee engagement. We've had several people tell me that they are better people when our students are around, that they speak differently, they use different language, and they act in a more humane way, and they attribute that to wanting to set a good example for our students. So our experience with it has been very positive, and happy to share that with you, and always happy to invite people to come and visit us in Southwest Detroit.
Quick question. When you say your students are working Tuesday and the next group goes in on Thursday, is that during the day?
Yes.
So that's their school day?
So all of our students come to school at 7:30. We have morning assembly with all of our students. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we dismiss. And if it's your work day, you check in with the work team. We provide transportation to get you to your job. Some of our job sites are 25, 30 miles away from the school. We go all over. And then we will pick you up at the end of the day. So from the Michigan Education Department, this counts as a school day because this is core to their education. But in terms of learning to multiply fractions, it doesn't help. So our school day is from 7:30 in the morning until 4. So that's about 2 hours longer than a regular high school. So if you have 2 hours extra 4 days a week, it makes up for the day you're at your job.
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you very much for sharing with everybody here what I've had a chance to experience firsthand, and it's an exceptional school out there. And I've talked to the students, and these students are some of the sharpest students that I've encountered, and a lot of them are in different professional capacities, in particular on these work-study programs that when I was in high school, I had an opportunity to work at McDonald's, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that, but these are not McDonald's jobs. These are getting into professional development. As you say, it kind of whets the appetite for a professional career and for college that you wouldn't normally get. So I've been questioned saying, hey, what's going to keep somebody from wanting to go not participate in the work-study program and instead go off and work the money so they can directly pocket it so they can go buy CDs and MP3s? Well, they're not getting the type of experience you can write on a resume. And maybe you can talk about some of the student growth that you've seen in particular. I know you talked a little bit about the employers, but you've seen the kids when they go into the program, you've seen them when they've come out. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that for some of the folks here.
Yeah, it's really, for me, it's about the exposure that the students receive. They start as freshmen, 14 years old. They don't really have a lot of experience of what business is or really what goes on in a law firm. They get that experience. I always say they see people who wear nice clothes, who have nice lunches, who don't lift things all day, and they're pretty quick to say, how do you get a job like that? And then the people say, you just got to go to college. And by the way, we want to give you that job when you graduate from college. So people like General Motors, DTE, they will say, this is part of us securing our future talent pipeline. We can't get enough African and American and Hispanic engineers or nurses or whatever that may be. And so we're going to get your kids excited about these careers in high school. We're going to support them in college, and then we're going to get them. And they are really committed to that. And one example would be Paulina. She came to our school, and no disrespect to anyone, really would like to open up a beauty shop. And she worked at General Motors, and they talked to her about engineering, And this is how it's transformational. She does a presentation for Mark Royce. I mean, it wasn't a real big MBA analysis, but she did a presentation for Mark Royce. That presentation is over. He says, how do we make sure Paulina has a good experience in college and want to come and work here? So now Paulina goes to University of Detroit Mercy to study engineering. GM calls up UD Mercy and say, we really like Paulina. We hope it works out for her. And it's working out for her. And so she's in her third year now of engineering. And she is on track. She's worked at FENUC last year over the summer internship program. She worked at General Motors as an intern the year before in the Ideal Group. And she's on track to probably be offered a $70,000 or $80,000 job at 23 or 24, when the average family income of our students is $34,000.
Mr. Chair, I mean, I'd like to point out, we've done a lot of discussions over how to incentivize kids to want to learn. We've done a lot of discussions over how do you incentivize good curriculum? How do you incentivize, all these things get wrapped up into a bow in this package because it's self-motivation. None of these kids are, they're mandated in context of the program here if you want, but they have a choice whether or not to go to
another
Cristo
school.
Rey in the first place. But the idea is, this is something where they're instilling that desire in the kids to go off and choose their own path, which is something we struggle to do from a state policy perspective a lot. How do you go off and motivate somebody from Lansing to do the right thing? These guys are doing it on a very practical, on a very local level, and in a very effective manner. And I think it's a good way of wrapping up all the stuff that we've been talking about. And I want to point out, I want to reemphasize that there's no benefit to Michael for coming out here at all today. I mean, essentially, it's like a magician revealing his tricks, if you will, and he's going off and letting other people know, because he cares deeply about kids, cares deeply about education. He wants people to understand what has worked in other areas. I mean, this is the equivalent for letting the private sector come out and tell the public sector what works in private sector, and this is a private parochial educator that's coming in here and helping us shape a better future for a lot of the kids that are in our public education system. And I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the time that I've spent out at Cristo Rey, and I appreciate your servant's heart.
My pleasure.
Senator Hopgood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Colbeck, I think you kind of hit on where my question was going. I appreciate the presentation. And maybe you said it, but I was just interested in what your interest is in this legislation. Did you envision using it, or is it something that's applicable to Cristo Rey? Are you supportive of it? I don't know.
So
if that's-
my sense is it would really have no impact on Detroit Cristo Rey or its families. But Senator Colbeck asked if I would share the impact of the work program on our students, and so I was happy to do that.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Wouldn't the potential expansion down the road help you and your students and your families as well, if more parents are participating in it and more of the work group partners were involved?
I guess I'm not clear how, so we're on our, I don't see how this legislation impacts what we're trying to do, to be honest. I mean, I'm trying to find more partners, we're getting more students, we're on that path.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how this would
On the
impact that.
funding piece, you have corporate partners, and one of the tenets to Senator Colbeck's package is that once there's a parental or individual investment, then that can potentially draw down additional corporate sponsors. On your sponsorship, do you, like if it's DTE, do they also help support programming inside your school, or is their contribution the wages that they?
Some do both. Quite frankly, once they meet the students, quite often they say, what else can we do to help the school? But for many of them, their commitment to the school is the wages that they pay to our school for the students.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and taking part of your day away from
Sure.
your operation.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Colbeck.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody, and you're all set, Mike. I just want to talk about the nuts and bolts of the amendments that we're proposing. So the legislation that's out there before us, there was a bill drafting error in regards to the student bill. I can't remember the number specifically on that, but and it specifically, some of the items that were optional based on whether or not a student participates were outside of that optional bracket. We want to make sure it's very clear that there's no impact to any schools, or the intent is, and that amendment will actually change that. There's no impact at all to any schools unless they choose to opt in to receive remuneration from these accounts. So that's part of what we're trying to nail down with that. And then also to clarify some other options in regards to service providers that may not be specifically in the public education. So if you want to do like a reading service or something like that, Sylvan Learning, you could use that for this as well. And the way the bill's currently drafted, you couldn't do that.
All right.
So those are the two suites of amendments.
Okay. Well, we don't have enough members to adopt those amendments and that substitute, so we'll bring that up when we kick this out of committee. There's been one card turned in of support but not wishing to speak from David Worthams, and he's with the Michigan Bankers Association here in Lansing. So we excuse absent members. See no more business before the committee. We are adjourned.